Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bustling flea market in downtown Austin. I weaved through the crowd, the smell of kettle corn and grilled sausages mingling with the musty scent of old books and vintage clothing. It was my weekly ritual, scouring the market for hidden treasures to add to my antique collection. As I approached my favorite vendor, Old Joe, I noticed a glint of brass peeking out from behind a stack of weathered vinyl records. Intrigued, I made my way over, carefully moving aside a few albums to reveal an ornate radio that looked like it belonged in the 1940s. "Hey, Joe," I called out, unable to take my eyes off the radio. "What's the story with this beauty?" Joe, a grizzled man in his 70s with a salt and pepper beard, ambled over. He squinted at the radio, scratching his head. "Well, I'll be damned. Don't remember picking that one up, Ryan. Must have been mixed in with that estate sale haul from last week." I ran my fingers over the intricate metalwork, feeling a strange tingle in my fingertips. "How much?" Joe shrugged. "Tell you what, since I can't recall its provenance, how about $20? "Sold," I said, perhaps a bit too eagerly. Joe raised an eyebrow but didn't comment as he wrapped the radio in old newspaper. As I carried my new acquisition home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The radio seemed to grow heavier with each step, and I could have sworn I felt a faint vibration coming from within. Once inside my apartment, I carefully unwrapped the radio and placed it on my cluttered desk. The brass gleamed in the soft light of my desk lamp, and I noticed intricate engravings along the sides. Symbols I didn't recognize, but that seemed to shift and change if I looked at them too long. "All right, let's see what you can do," I murmured, plugging the radio into a nearby outlet. To my surprise, it hummed to life without any need to flip a switch. Static filled the air, and I began to turn the dial, searching for a clear signal. Suddenly, the static cleared and a voice emerged, crisp and clear as if it were in the room with me. "In breaking news, local antique collector Ryan Mitchell was found dead in his apartment earlier today. Authorities are ruling it a tragic accident, stating that Mitchell apparently slipped in his bathroom and hit his head on the sink. The 32-year-old was well known in the Austin antique community." I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. "What the hell?" I gasped, staring at the radio in disbelief. How did it know my name? And why was it talking about my death? With trembling hands, I reached out to change the station, but as soon as I touched the dial, a jolt of electricity shot through my arm. I yelped and yanked my hand back, watching in horror as the radio continued its macabre broadcast. Mitchell's body was discovered by his neighbor, who reported a strange odor coming from the apartment. Police estimate that he had been dead for several days before being found. Friends and family are shocked by the sudden loss. No, I muttered, pacing around the room. "This isn't real. It can't be real." I pinched myself, hard, hoping to wake up from what surely must be a nightmare. But the pain was real, and the radio kept talking. I grabbed my phone, ready to call someone, anyone, who could help make sense of this. But as my finger hovered over the call button, I hesitated. Who would believe me? They'd think I was crazy, hearing voices from a radio predicting my death. The broadcast suddenly cut out, replaced by static. I approached the radio cautiously, half expecting it to spring to life again. But it remained silent, save for the soft hiss of white noise. "Okay, Ryan, get it together," I said aloud, trying to steady my nerves. "There's got to be a logical explanation for this." I spent the next hour examining the radio from every angle, looking for hidden speakers or some kind of modern technology that could explain what I'd heard. But as far as I could tell, it was exactly what it appeared to be, a vintage radio from the 1940s. As night fell, I found myself unable to leave the radio's side. I ordered takeout, barely tasting the food as I ate, my eyes never leaving the silent brass contraption on my desk. Around midnight, Just as I was considering trying to get some sleep, the radio crackled to life again. This time, a different voice filled the room. We interrupt this program to bring you a special report. The body of Ryan Mitchell, discovered last week in his Austin apartment, has been exhumed for further investigation. New evidence suggests that his death may not have been accidental as initially reported. Toxicology reports indicate the presence of an unknown substance in Mitchell's system. "Stop it!" I shouted, grabbing the radio. "Just stop." To my surprise, the broadcast cut off abruptly. The sudden silence was almost as unnerving as the voices had been. I slumped into my chair, my mind racing. 2 different reports, 2 different deaths, both about me. What was going on? A knock at my door made me jump. I glanced at the clock, 12:30 a.m. Who could be here at this hour? Cautiously, I approached the door and looked through the peephole. It was my neighbor, Sarah. I opened the door, trying to compose myself. "Sarah, is everything okay?" She looked concerned. I heard shouting. "Are you all right, Ryan?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, sorry about that. Just watching a scary movie. Got a bit too into it, I guess." Sarah didn't look convinced. "Are you sure? You look pale." "I'm fine, really," I insisted. "Thanks for checking on me, though. I appreciate it." After a few more reassurances, I managed to send Sarah on her way. As I closed the door, I leaned against it, my heart still racing. Her visit had been a stark reminder of the radio's first broadcast, about my neighbor discovering my body. I turned back to the radio, half expecting it to be gone, like some sort of hallucination. But there it sat, innocuous and silent, its brass surface reflecting the dim light of my apartment. Sleep was out of the question now. I made a strong cup of coffee and settled in for a long night, my laptop open as I began to research anything I could find about prophetic radios or antiques that could predict the future. Hours passed and I found nothing but conspiracy theories and debunked urban legends. The sun was starting to peek through my curtains when the radio suddenly sprang to life again. This time it was my own voice that came through the speakers. "I don't know who will find this recording, but if you're listening, please, whatever you do, don't ignore it like I did. The radio, it knows things. It sees the future. My future. Multiple futures. I've been running for weeks now trying to escape its predictions, but they always come true in one way or another. I thought I could outsmart it, but I was wrong. So wrong. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it. Please destroy the radio. Don't let it..." The message cut off abruptly, replaced by static. I sat there, frozen, staring at the radio with a mixture of fear and fascination. Part of me wanted to follow the advice of my future self and destroy the radio right then and there, but a larger part, the part that had always been drawn to mysteries and the unknown, couldn't bear the thought of losing this connection to the future, no matter how terrifying it might be. As the first rays of sunlight filtered into my apartment, I made a decision. I wouldn't destroy the radio. Not yet. I needed to understand it first. I needed to know why it had chosen me, and if there was any way to change the gruesome fates it predicted. With shaking hands, I unplugged the radio and carefully wrapped it in a thick blanket. I couldn't risk anyone else hearing its broadcasts. As I placed it in a locked drawer of my desk, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was sealing my own fate. But as I finally crawled into bed, exhausted and overwhelmed, one thought kept circling in my mind. Knowledge is power. And now, for better or worse, I had knowledge of the future. My future. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would push me to the very limits of sanity and challenge everything I thought I knew about fate, time, and the nature of reality itself. The shrill sound of my alarm pierced through the fog of my fitful sleep. I jolted awake, my heart racing as the events of the previous night came flooding back. For a blissful moment, I had forgotten about the radio and its terrifying predictions. Now, reality crashed down on me like a ton of bricks. It was just a dream, I muttered to myself, running a hand through my disheveled hair. Just a crazy, vivid dream. But as I stumbled out of bed and caught sight of my haggard reflection in the mirror, I knew it wasn't a dream. The dark circles under my eyes and the lingering tremor in my hands were all too real. I went through the motions of my morning routine, trying to convince myself that everything was normal. The radio remained locked in my desk drawer, silent and innocuous. Part of me wanted to open the drawer, to prove to myself that it was just an ordinary antique. But fear kept me from touching it. As I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed with a text from my boss, Linda. "Ryan, don't forget about the client meeting at 10. We're counting on you to close this deal." I glanced at the clock. 8:30 a.m. I had completely forgotten about the meeting. With a sigh, I replied, "I'll be there. Thanks for the reminder." The drive to work was a blur. Every car horn, every screech of tires made me flinch, the radio's prediction of a car crash echoing in my mind. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of our office building, my knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself before heading inside. "Get it together, Ryan," I whispered. "It's just an ordinary day. Nothing is going to happen." As I walked into the office, my colleague Mike called out to me. "Hey, Ryan, ready for the big meeting?" I forced a smile. "As ready as I'll ever be." Mike frowned, studying my face. "You okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just a rough night," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Nothing coffee can't fix." The morning dragged on, each tick of the clock feeling like an eternity. I couldn't focus on my work, my mind constantly drifting back to the radio and its ominous broadcasts. Every time someone walked past my office, I jumped, half expecting them to bring news of my impending doom. Finally, it was time for the client meeting. I gathered my materials and headed to the conference room, my palms sweaty and my heart racing. As I set up my presentation, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The clients filed in, and I began my pitch. At first, everything seemed to be going well. But as I clicked to the next slide, the image on the screen suddenly changed. Instead of our company's projections, there was a news article. The headline read, "Local businessman dies in freak accident during meeting." I blinked, and the image was gone, replaced by the correct slide. No one else seemed to have noticed anything amiss. "Mr. Mitchell?" one of the clients asked, concern evident in her voice. "Are you all right?" I realized I had stopped mid-sentence, staring at the screen. I'm fine," I stammered. Just lost my train of thought for a moment. Where was I? Somehow I managed to stumble through the rest of the presentation, but I could tell from the clients' expressions that I had blown it. As they filed out of the room, I overheard one of them muttering, "If this is their best, we might need to look elsewhere." Linda cornered me as soon as the clients were gone. "Ryan, what the hell happened in there? You were completely off your game." I opened my mouth to explain, but what could I say? That I was distracted by a magic radio predicting my death? Instead, I just shook my head. "I'm sorry, Linda. I'm not feeling well. I think I might be coming down with something." She sighed, her expression softening slightly. "Go home, Ryan. Get some rest. We'll talk about this tomorrow." The drive home was even worse than the drive to work. Every intersection felt like a potential death trap. By the time I reached my apartment, I was a nervous wreck. As soon as I walked through the door, my eyes were drawn to the desk where the radio was hidden. Despite my fear, I felt an irresistible urge to hear it again, to prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy. With trembling hands, I unlocked the drawer and unwrapped the radio. It sat there, silent and innocent-looking. I plugged it in, and immediately, it crackled to life. "Breaking news," a voice announced. "A tragic accident at Greenwood Industries has claimed the life of Ryan Mitchell, a promising young executive. Witnesses report that Mitchell collapsed during a client meeting, apparently suffering a massive heart attack. Despite immediate medical attention, he was pronounced dead at the scene. Colleagues described Mitchell as a dedicated and talented individual, with a bright future ahead of him. I unplugged the radio, my breath coming in short gasps. This was a new prediction, different from the ones I had heard last night. And it was about something that could have happened today if things had gone differently in that meeting. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The radio wasn't just predicting one possible future, it was predicting multiple potential futures, all ending with my death. I spent the rest of the evening in a daze, alternating between pacing my apartment and staring at the radio, waiting for it to speak again. But it remained stubbornly silent. As night fell, exhaustion began to set in. I hadn't slept properly in over 24 hours, and the stress was taking its toll. Despite my fear, I knew I needed to rest. I crawled into bed, leaving the radio unplugged on my desk. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was waiting for me in the darkness. My dreams were a chaotic mix of images and sounds. I saw myself dying in 100 different ways. Car crashes, heart attacks, falls, drownings. Each time the radio was there, broadcasting my demise to an unseen audience. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:27 a.m. The room was pitch black save for a faint glow coming from my desk. My blood ran cold as I realized what it was. The radio was on, its dial illuminated despite being unplugged. I scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping over my tangled sheets in my haste to reach the desk. As I got closer, I could hear a voice coming from the radio, barely above a whisper. Ryan Mitchell. Your time is running out, Ryan. No matter what you do, no matter where you go, fate will catch up with you. You can't escape your destiny. No, I shouted, grabbing the radio. This isn't real. It can't be real. I hurled the radio across the room. It hit the wall with a resounding crash, pieces of brass and circuitry scattering across the floor. The voice cut off abruptly, plunging the room into silence. For a moment I stood there, panting, staring at the broken remains of the radio. Had I done it? Had I broken whatever curse or spell it had cast on me? But then, to my horror, I heard a faint crackling sound. From amidst the debris, a small speaker began to emit static. And then, clear as day, I heard my own voice. You can't destroy me, Ryan. I'm a part of you now. Your future. Your fate. It's all written in the airwaves. The only question is, which broadcast will come true? I sank to my knees, my mind reeling. This was no ordinary radio. Whatever I had brought into my home that day at the flea market, it was something beyond my understanding, something that defied the laws of reality as I knew them. As the first light of dawn began to creep through my windows, I made a decision. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I needed help, someone to verify that I wasn't losing my mind, someone to help me make sense of what was happening. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Hello? A groggy voice answered. Sarah? I said, my voice cracking. It's Ryan, from next door. I need your help. Something's happening to me, something I can't explain. Can you come over? There was a pause, and then Sarah replied, concern evident in her voice. Of course, Ryan. I'll be right there. As I ended the call, my eyes were drawn back to the broken radio on the floor. The static had stopped, but I could swear I heard a faint whisper, barely audible. Tick-tock, Ryan, tick-tock. I shuddered, wrapping my arms around myself. Whatever was going on, whatever this radio was, I knew one thing for certain. My life would never be the same again. The question was, how much of that life did I have left? The gentle knock on my apartment door startled me out of my trance-like state. I had been staring at the broken pieces of the radio scattered across my floor, my mind racing with possibilities and fears. Ryan, it's Sarah, can I come in? Her voice was muffled through the door, but I could hear the concern in her tone. I stumbled to my feet, suddenly aware of how disheveled I must look. Glancing in the mirror, I saw a wild-eyed stranger staring back at me, hair matted with sweat, stubble darkening my jaw. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself before opening the door. Sarah's eyes widened as she took in my appearance. "Oh my God, Ryan, what happened to you?" I stepped aside, letting her in. I don't even know where to begin," I said, my voice hoarse. Sarah's gaze swept across the room, taking in the chaos, papers strewn about, my laptop open to a dozen tabs about prophetic objects and time anomalies, and the shattered remains of the radio. "Start from the beginning," she said gently, guiding me to sit on the couch. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath and began to recount the events of the past 2 days. Finding the radio at the flea market, hearing the broadcasts about my death, the terrifying predictions that seemed to shift and change. As I spoke, Sarah's expression changed from concern to disbelief, then to a guarded neutrality. When I finished, silence hung heavy in the air. "Ryan," she began carefully, "have you considered that maybe you're under a lot of stress? Perhaps you should talk to someone, a professional." "I'm not crazy," I snapped, immediately regretting my outburst as Sarah flinched. "I'm sorry, I know how it sounds, but it's real, Sarah. The radio, the broadcasts, all of it." Sarah's eyes flickered to the broken pieces on the floor. "Can you show me? Make it work?" I laughed bitterly. "I smashed it, remember? But even broken..." I trailed off, remembering the voice that had come from the debris. "Maybe. Let me try." I knelt by the scattered parts, my hands shaking as I gathered them together. "Come on," I muttered. "Speak to me. Show her I'm not crazy." But the pieces remained stubbornly silent. Sarah placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Ryan, I think you need help. Real help. This obsession isn't healthy." I shrugged off her hand, frustration and fear bubbling up inside me. "You don't understand. Nobody understands." "Then help me understand," Sarah pleaded. "Let's figure this out together. But first you need to rest. When was the last time you slept properly?" I ran a hand through my hair, trying to remember. I don't know. Everything's been a blur since I found that damn radio." Sarah nodded, her expression softening. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to take a shower and try to get some sleep. I'll clean up in here and do some research. When you wake up, we'll tackle this together. Deal?" Part of me wanted to protest, to keep searching for answers, but exhaustion was taking its toll, and Sarah's plan sounded reasonable. "Deal," I agreed reluctantly. As I showered, letting the hot water wash away some of the tension in my muscles, I could hear Sarah moving around in the living room tidying up. The normalcy of the sound was comforting, grounding me in reality. I emerged from the bathroom feeling slightly more human. Sarah had made the bed and drawn the curtains, creating a cocoon of darkness in my bedroom. "Try to sleep," she said softly. "I'll be right out here if you need anything." As soon as my head hit the pillow, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. I woke up disoriented, the room dark and unfamiliar for a moment. Panic gripped me as the memories of the past few days came rushing back. I fumbled for my phone, squinting at the bright screen. 7:23 p.m. I had slept for almost 12 hours. Stumbling out of bed, I made my way to the living room. Sarah was curled up on the couch, her laptop open beside her, scrolling through a web page. She looked up as I entered. "Hey, how are you feeling?" "Better," I admitted, surprised to find it was true. The fog of exhaustion had lifted, leaving my mind clearer than it had been in days. "Any luck with the research?" Sarah sighed, closing her laptop. "Nothing concrete. Lots of stories and legends about prophetic objects, but nothing that matches exactly what you described. But Ryan, I did find something else." The hesitation in her voice made my stomach clench. "What is it?" She pulled out her phone, tapping the screen a few times before handing it to me. "I found this while you were sleeping. It's from about 6 months ago." I looked at the screen, my blood running cold as I read the headline. Local man hospitalized after psychotic episode claims radio predicted his death. That's not possible, I stammered, scrolling through the article. The details were eerily similar to my own experience. A man finding an antique radio, hearing broadcasts about his death, becoming increasingly paranoid and erratic. Ryan, Sarah said gently, is it possible that you came across this story sometime in the past and it, I don't know, lodged in your subconscious? Maybe with the stress you've been under lately, it resurfaced as a kind of delusion? I wanted to deny it, to insist that my experience was real and unique. But doubt began to creep in. Could she be right? Was my mind playing tricks on me? I don't know, I admitted, slumping onto the couch beside her. Everything felt so real. The broadcasts, the predictions. How could I have imagined all of that? Sarah placed a comforting hand on my arm. The human mind is incredibly powerful, Ryan. Stress, lack of sleep, anxiety. They can all contribute to experiences that feel completely real. I nodded slowly, trying to process this new perspective. But something still nagged at me. What about the radio itself? It was real. You saw the pieces. You bought an antique radio at a flea market, Sarah pointed out. That part is real. But the rest? Ryan, I think you should consider talking to someone. A therapist could help you work through this, figure out what's really going on. Part of me wanted to argue, to cling to the belief that what I had experienced was real. But another part, the rational part that had been drowned out by fear and paranoia over the past few days, knew that Sarah's suggestion made sense. Okay, I said finally. I'll make an appointment. But Sarah, what if I'm not crazy? What if it's all real? She squeezed my hand reassuringly. Then we'll face it together. But let's start with the most logical explanation first, okay? I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. As Sarah began looking up local therapists on her phone, my gaze was drawn to the corner of the room where the broken radio pieces had been. The floor was clean now, no sign of the shattered antique. Sarah, I said, a note of panic creeping into my voice. Where are the radio pieces? She looked up, frowning. What do you mean? There was just some broken glass and a few bits of metal. I swept it up while you were sleeping. Why? I stared at the empty corner, a chill running down my spine. Had I imagined the intricate brass radio? Were the pieces Sarah swept up just the remains of some ordinary object I had broken in my delusional state? As if in answer to my unspoken questions, a faint static hiss filled the air. Sarah didn't seem to notice, focused on her phone. But I heard it clearly, a whisper beneath the static, barely audible. You can't escape your fate, Ryan. The broadcast isn't over yet. I shuddered, closing my eyes tightly. When I opened them, the sound was gone. Sarah was looking at me with concern. Ryan, are you okay? I forced a smile, pushing down the fear threatening to overwhelm me again. Yeah, I'm fine, just tired, I guess. Did you find a therapist? As Sarah began telling me about a highly recommended psychologist in the area, I nodded along, trying to focus on her words. But part of my mind was elsewhere, straining to hear any hint of static, any whisper from the future that might still be trying to reach me. Real or imagined, radio or delusion, I knew one thing for certain. My journey for answers was far from over. And whether the threat to my life was external or internal, I would have to stay vigilant if I wanted to survive. The question was, could I trust my own mind to guide me through whatever challenges lay ahead? Or was I already too far gone, lost in a web of paranoia and fear of my own making? As night fell outside my apartment window, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. One way or another, I needed to uncover the truth, before it was too late. The waiting room of Dr. Eleanor Simmons' office was eerily quiet, save for the soft ticking of an antique clock on the wall. I sat rigidly in an uncomfortable chair, my leg bouncing nervously as I waited for my first therapy session to begin. It had been 3 days since Sarah had convinced me to seek professional help. 3 days of relative silence from the radio, or whatever it was that had been tormenting me. But the quiet hadn't brought peace. Instead, it felt like the calm before a storm, a temporary reprieve before the next onslaught of terrifying predictions. "Mr. Mitchell?" A soft voice broke through my reverie. I looked up to see a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, standing in the doorway. "I'm Dr. Simmons, please come in." I followed her into a warmly lit office, taking a seat on a plush leather couch. Dr. Simmons settled into an armchair across from me, notepad in hand. "So, Ryan," she began, her voice gentle but professional, "why don't you tell me what brings you here today?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I think I'm being haunted by a radio that predicts my death." To her credit, Dr. Simmons didn't even blink at my outlandish statement. She simply nodded, encouraging me to continue. For the next hour, I poured out my story, finding the radio, hearing the broadcasts, my increasing paranoia, and Sarah's discovery of the similar case from months ago. Dr. Simmons listened attentively, occasionally jotting down notes. When I finished, she set her notepad aside and leaned forward slightly. "Ryan, what you're experiencing sounds incredibly distressing. I can only imagine how frightening and confusing this must be for you." "So you believe me?" I asked, hope creeping into my voice. Dr. Simmons chose her words carefully. "I believe that your experiences feel very real to you. Whether or not there's a supernatural element at play, the fear and anxiety you're feeling are genuine and need to be addressed." She went on to explain how stress, anxiety, and lack of sleep could contribute to experiences that feel real, but may not be grounded in objective reality. We discussed coping mechanisms and the possibility of medication to help manage my anxiety. As I left the office an hour later, I felt lighter somehow. Not cured, not by a long shot, but like I had taken a step in the right direction. That feeling lasted until I got home. As soon as I opened my apartment door, I knew something was wrong. The air felt charged, heavy with an unseen presence. And there, sitting on my coffee table as if it had never been broken, was the radio. "No," I whispered, stumbling backward. No, this isn't real. It can't be real." But even as I said the words, the radio crackled to life. "Breaking news," a familiar voice announced. "Tragedy strikes as local man Ryan Mitchell dies in a freak accident at his therapist's office. Witnesses report that Mitchell fell down a flight of stairs, breaking his neck. Authorities are investigating whether prescription medication may have played a role in the incident." I slammed my hands over my ears, but the voice continued, seeming to come from inside my own head now. "You can't escape, Ryan. Every attempt to change your fate only brings you closer to it." "Shut up," I screamed, grabbing the radio and hurling it against the wall. It shattered, pieces scattering across the floor, just like before. But this time, I didn't wait to see if it would speak again. I ran out of the apartment, down the stairs, and into the street. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in short gasps. I had to get away, had to do something to break this cycle. Without really thinking about where I was going, I found myself at the bus station. A Greyhound was loading passengers for a trip to Houston. On impulse, I bought a ticket and boarded the bus. As we pulled out of the station, I felt a small sense of triumph. I was taking control, actively avoiding the situation the radio had predicted. Surely, if I wasn't in Austin, if I wasn't anywhere near my therapist's office, that particular death couldn't come true. The trip to Houston was uneventful, and for a few blissful hours, I allowed myself to relax. Maybe this was all I needed. A change of scenery, a break from the familiar surroundings that had become tainted by fear and paranoia. I checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, using cash to avoid leaving an electronic trail. As night fell, I found myself pacing the small room, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. Around midnight, unable to sleep, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The motel parking lot was dimly lit, the neon vacancy sign casting an eerie red glow over the cracked asphalt. As I rounded the corner of the building, a flicker of movement caught my eye. There, sitting on a rusted old pickup truck, was a small portable radio. My blood ran cold as it crackled to life. "This just in," the now familiar voice announced. "Houston police are baffled by the death of an unidentified man found in a motel parking lot. The victim, believed to be in his early 30s, appears to have been struck by lightning, despite clear skies in the area. Authorities are investigating the possibility of foul play." I backed away from the truck, my heart racing. This couldn't be happening. I had left Austin, left everything behind. How could it follow me here? A low rumble of thunder in the distance made me jump. I looked up to see dark clouds gathering overhead seemingly out of nowhere. "No," I muttered, breaking into a run. "This isn't real. It's not real." I sprinted back to my room, slamming the door behind me and sliding down to sit with my back against it. My whole body was shaking, cold sweat beading on my forehead. The room's ancient TV flickered to life, static filling the screen before resolving into a clear image. A news anchor looked solemnly into the camera. "We interrupt this program to bring you breaking news," she said, her voice eerily similar to the one from the radio. "A manhunt is underway for Ryan Mitchell, a person of interest in a string of bizarre deaths across Texas. Mitchell, last seen fleeing his therapist's office in Austin, is believed to be mentally unstable and potentially dangerous." I scrambled to my feet, fumbling for the TV remote and jabbing at the power button, but the TV remained on, the anchor's voice growing louder. "Authorities warn that Mitchell may be experiencing delusions involving prophetic radios and predictions of his own death. The public is advised to exercise extreme caution and report any sightings immediately." "Stop it," I yelled, unplugging the TV. But the image remained, the anchor's voice now echoing from every corner of the room. "You can run, Ryan, but you can't hide from fate. Every step you take brings you closer to your destiny." In a panic, I grabbed my few belongings and burst out of the room. The storm had intensified, rain lashing down in sheets. Lightning split the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. I ran blindly through the parking lot, no destination in mind, just a desperate need to escape. But with each flash of lightning, I saw radios, on car dashboards and open windows, sitting on the ground. All of them broadcasting my doom, all of them closing in. As I reached the edge of the parking lot, a particularly bright flash of lightning illuminated a figure standing directly in my path. For a moment, I thought it was death itself, come to claim me. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was Sarah. "Ryan," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. "What are you doing?" "Sarah?" I gasped, stumbling to a halt. How did you find me?" She took a step toward me, concern etched on her face. "Find you? Ryan, you never left Austin. You've been standing in the middle of the street outside your apartment for the past hour, screaming at the sky." I blinked, the world around me shifting and blurring. The motel parking lot faded away, replaced by the familiar surroundings of my neighborhood. The storm was real, but less intense than I had imagined. And there, clutched in my hand, was the broken radio from my apartment. I don't understand," I stammered, my mind reeling. "Houston, the motel. It felt so real." Sarah gently took the radio from my hand, setting it aside. "You're having an episode, Ryan. Dr. Simmons warned me this might happen. We need to get you help." As Sarah led me back toward my apartment building, my mind raced. Had it all been a delusion? The trip to Houston, the motel, the lightning strike prediction, all figments of my increasingly fractured psyche? But as we reached the building's entrance, I heard it again, a faint whisper beneath the sound of the rain. "The broadcast isn't over, Ryan. Your final episode is yet to come." I shuddered, clinging to Sarah's arm as we entered the building. Real or imagined, Radio or delusion, one thing was clear. My attempts to change fate had only entangled me further in its web. And as we climbed the stairs to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was ascending toward my doom, one step at a time. The harsh fluorescent lights of the psychiatric ward buzzed incessantly, a constant reminder of where I was. It had been 2 weeks since Sarah had found me in the street, lost in a vivid hallucination. 2 weeks since I'd been admitted to Oakwood Behavioral Health Center for my own safety, as Dr. Simmons had put it. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, staring at the plain white walls of my room. The space was devoid of personal items, no electronics, no sharp objects, nothing that could potentially harm me or others. It was meant to be a safe space, but to me, it felt like a prison. A soft knock on the door broke through my brooding thoughts. "Ryan, it's time for group therapy," a gentle voice called. It was Nurse Martinez, one of the few staff members I felt I could trust. I sighed heavily, pushing myself off the bed. "Coming," I replied, my voice flat and lifeless. As I followed Nurse Martinez down the sterile hallway, I couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. How many times had I walked this path in the past 2 weeks? How many more times would I have to before they believed I was better? The group therapy room was already half full when we arrived. I took my usual seat in the circle, nodding a greeting to the familiar faces around me. Dr. Patel, our group therapist, smiled warmly as I settled in. "Welcome, everyone," Dr. Patel began once we were all seated. "Today we're going to talk about distinguishing between reality and delusion. Who would like to start by sharing their experiences?" A heavy silence fell over the room. I kept my eyes fixed on the floor, hoping someone else would volunteer. But as the silence stretched on, I felt the weight of expectation settling on my shoulders. Finally, I cleared my throat. I can start," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Patel nodded encouragingly. "Thank you, Ryan. Please, share with the group what you're comfortable with." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I've been struggling to know what's real and what isn't. There's this radio. It predicts my death. Or at least I thought it did. Now I'm not sure of anything anymore. As I spoke, I could feel the eyes of the other patients on me. Some looked sympathetic, others wary. I pressed on, recounting the events that had led me here. Finding the radio, hearing the broadcasts, my increasing paranoia, and the vivid hallucination that had finally landed me in Oakwood. When I finished, Dr. Patel leaned forward slightly. "Thank you for sharing, Ryan. Can you tell us how you're feeling now, looking back on those experiences?" I ran a hand through my hair, frustrated. I don't know. Part of me knows it sounds crazy. The rational part of my brain says it's impossible. But another part, it still feels so real. The fear, the certainty that I was going to die, those feelings haven't gone away. Dr. Patel nodded thoughtfully. "It's common for the emotional impact of delusions to linger, even when we intellectually understand they weren't real. Does anyone else in the group have similar experiences they'd like to share?" As other patients began to speak, sharing their own struggles with reality and perception, I found my mind wandering. My gaze drifted to the window, where raindrops were starting to patter against the glass. The gloomy weather matched my mood perfectly. Suddenly, a flash of lightning illuminated the sky, followed closely by a rumble of thunder. I flinched involuntarily, memories of my hallucinated storm in Houston flooding back. "Ryan?" Dr. Patel's voice cut through my thoughts. "You seem to react to the thunder. Can you tell us what you're experiencing right now?" I blinked, trying to focus. It reminded me of the storm in my hallucination. For a moment, it felt like I was back there. Dr. Patel nodded. "That's a normal response. Sensory triggers can often bring back memories or feelings associated with past experiences, real or imagined. Let's talk about some grounding techniques that might help in moments like these." As the group discussion continued, I tried to pay attention, to absorb the coping strategies being shared, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. Something about the storm outside felt ominous. After group therapy ended, I made my way back to my room, lost in thought. As I turned the corner, I nearly collided with Sarah, who was just leaving the nurse's station. "Sarah?" I gasped, surprised to see her. "What are you doing here?" She smiled, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "I came to check on you. How are you feeling?" I shrugged, unsure how to answer. "I'm here, I guess. They keep telling me I'm making progress, but I don't feel any different." Sarah reached out, squeezing my arm gently. "It takes time, Ryan, but you're doing the right thing, getting help." As we talked, walking slowly down the hallway, I felt a strange sense of normalcy return. For a moment it was like old times, just two friends chatting, no talk of death predictions or hallucinations. But as we passed by the common room, something caught my eye. There, sitting on a shelf in the corner, was an old radio. My heart began to race. "Ryan?" Sarah's voice seemed distant. "What's wrong?" I pointed at the radio, my hand shaking. "Do you see that? The radio?" Sarah frowned, following my gaze. "Yes, I see it. It's just an old radio, Ryan. Probably doesn't even work anymore." As if in response to her words, the radio crackled to life. A familiar voice filled the air. "We interrupt this program to bring you breaking news. A tragic fire has broken out at Oakwood Behavioral Health Center. Among the casualties is Ryan Mitchell, a patient who had been admitted for treatment of severe delusions. Witnesses report that Mitchell became agitated during a therapy session, knocking over a lamp and starting the blaze. Despite efforts to save him, Mitchell perished in the flames. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short gasps. No, it's happening again. Sarah, we have to get out of here." Sarah grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to look at her. "Ryan, stop. There's no broadcast, the radio isn't even plugged in, you're having another episode." I blinked, trying to focus on Sarah's face, but the voice from the radio continued, growing louder, drowning out everything else. "You can't escape your fate, Ryan. The fire is coming. Your time is running out." In a panic, I broke free from Sarah's grasp and ran down the hallway. I could hear her calling after me, her voice mixing with shouts from the hospital staff. But all I could focus on was the need to escape, to get away from the impending doom the radio had predicted. I burst through the emergency exit, setting off alarms. The rain was coming down in sheets now, soaking me to the skin in seconds. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the hospital grounds in stark, terrifying clarity. As I ran blindly across the wet grass, I could hear voices behind me. Sarah, Dr. Patel, hospital security. But their shouts were drowned out by the voice from the radio, which seemed to be coming from everywhere at once now. "Run all you want, Ryan. You can't outrun fate. The fire is in your mind, and it's consuming everything." I stumbled, falling to my knees in the mud. As I looked up, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The hospital windows were glowing with an orange light. Fire! "No!" I screamed, scrambling to my feet. "I have to warn them. I have to save them." I turned back toward the building, ready to rush in and sound the alarm, but strong hands grabbed me, holding me back. "Ryan, stop!" It was Dr. Patel, his voice firm but kind. "There's no fire. Look closely. It's just the sunset reflecting off the windows." I blinked, my vision clearing slightly. He was right. There was no fire, just the golden light of the setting sun breaking through the storm clouds, casting an eerie glow over the building. As the adrenaline faded, I felt my legs give out. Dr. Patel and a security guard lowered me gently to the ground. Sarah appeared, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. I don't understand," I mumbled, shivering. It felt so real. The radio, the broadcast, the fire. Dr. Patel crouched beside me, his expression serious but compassionate. "Ryan, I think it's time we consider adjusting your treatment plan. These episodes are becoming more frequent and more intense. We need to address this before someone gets hurt, including you." As they helped me to my feet, guiding me back toward the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The line between reality and delusion had blurred beyond recognition, and I was lost in the haze. The radio's voice, real or imagined, echoed in my mind. "The broadcast isn't over, Ryan. Your final episode is yet to come." I shuddered, clinging to Sarah and Dr. Patel as we entered the hospital. Whatever came next, whatever reality I found myself in, I knew one thing for certain. My grip on sanity was slipping, and I was terrified of what might happen when I finally lost my hold completely. The soft beep of medical equipment filled the air as I slowly opened my eyes. The stark white ceiling of the hospital room came into focus, a sight I had become all too familiar with over the past few weeks. After my breakdown in the rain, Dr. Patel had decided to move me to the intensive care unit of Oakwood for closer observation and a more aggressive treatment plan. "Welcome back, Sleeping Beauty," a familiar voice said softly. I turned my head to see Sarah sitting in a chair beside my bed, a worn paperback novel in her lap. She looked tired with dark circles under her eyes, but she managed a small smile. "How long was I out?" I asked, my voice hoarse from disuse. Sarah glanced at her watch. "About 18 hours this time. The new medication they've got you on is pretty strong." I nodded, trying to shake off the fog in my brain. The new cocktail of antipsychotics and mood stabilizers had been keeping the hallucinations at bay, but at the cost of leaving me feeling like a zombie most of the time. "Any broadcasts while I was asleep?" I asked hesitantly. Sarah shook her head. "Not a peep. Looks like the radio's gone quiet for now." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It had been 3 days since I'd last heard the ominous voice predicting my doom. Part of me was relieved, but another part was waiting for the other shoe to drop. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Dr. Patel entered, clipboard in hand and a cautiously optimistic expression on his face. "Good morning, Ryan," he said, approaching the bed. "How are you feeling today?" I considered the question for a moment. "Foggy," I admitted. "But quieter, I guess. Inside my head, I mean." Dr. Patel nodded, making a note on his clipboard. "That's to be expected with the new medication. The fog should start to clear in a few days as your body adjusts. The important thing is that you're not experiencing any hallucinations or delusions, correct?" I nodded slowly. Not since the rain." "Excellent," Dr. Patel said, smiling. "I think we're making real progress, Ryan. In fact, I have a proposal for you." He pulled up a chair, sitting down next to Sarah. "We've been discussing your case, and we think it might be beneficial for you to start reintegrating into a more normal routine. How would you feel about spending some time in the general ward, maybe participating in some group activities?" I felt a flutter of anxiety in my chest at the thought of leaving the safety of the ICU. I don't know. What if I have another episode?" "That's a valid concern," Dr. Patel acknowledged. "But we'll be monitoring you closely, and you can always return here if you feel overwhelmed. Sometimes, a change of environment can be incredibly therapeutic." I looked at Sarah, seeking her opinion. She squeezed my hand encouragingly. "I think it's worth a try, Ryan. You can't stay cooped up in here forever." After a moment's hesitation, I nodded. "Okay, I'll give it a shot." The next morning, I found myself in a sunny common room on the general ward. Patients in comfortable clothes milled about, some reading, others engaged in quiet conversation or working on puzzles. It was a far cry from the sterile, controlled environment of the ICU. I settled into an armchair by the window, a book Dr. Patel had recommended clutched in my hands. As I tried to focus on the words on the page, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every few minutes, I'd glance up, half expecting to see a radio materializing out of thin air. "First day out of ICU, huh?" A voice startled me out of my vigilance. I looked up to see a young woman with short, spiky hair and kind eyes standing next to my chair. She gestured to the empty seat beside me. "Mind if I join you?" I shook my head and she plopped down in the chair. "I'm Zoe," she said, offering her hand. "Ryan," I replied, shaking it hesitantly. Zoe grinned. So, what's your flavor of crazy? Me? I've got a bad case of the old OCD. Can't leave my room without checking the lock exactly 13 times. I blinked, taken aback by her bluntness. I hear things. Radios predicting my death. To my surprise, Zoe didn't seem fazed. Huh, death by radio. That's a new one. Bet that makes it hard to enjoy a good tune. Despite myself, I felt a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. Yeah, it's put a damper on my Spotify habits. We fell into an easy conversation, Zoe's irreverent humor helping to ease my anxiety. For the first time in weeks, I found myself relaxing, even laughing at some of her jokes. As we chatted, I noticed an orderly wheeling a cart into the room. On it sat an old television set. My heart rate picked up, memories of my hallucinated broadcasts flooding back. Zoe must have noticed my tension. "You okay there, radio man?" I nodded stiffly, trying to keep my breathing even. "Yeah, just... TVs can be triggers sometimes." "Want to get out of here?" Zoe asked, standing up. "I know a great spot in the garden where we can hide from our demons for a bit." Grateful for the escape, I followed Zoe out to a small courtyard garden. The fresh air and sunshine helped to calm my nerves, and soon we were back to our easy banter. As the day wore on, I found myself feeling normal. The constant fear and paranoia that had been my companions for so long seemed to have receded, at least for the moment. That evening, as I prepared to return to my room in the ICU, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Dr. Patel met me in the hallway, his face breaking into a smile as he saw my expression. "I take it the day went well?" I nodded, surprised to find I meant it. "Yeah, it did. I met someone. Zoe. She helped. Connecting with others who understand what you're going through can be incredibly powerful," Dr. Patel said. "I'm glad you had a positive experience. How would you feel about spending more time on the general ward?" I considered for a moment. The day had been good, but the memory of my past episodes still loomed large. Maybe we could try it again tomorrow. But I think I'd still like to sleep in the ICU just in case. Dr. Patel nodded understandingly. "Of course. We'll take this at your pace, Ryan. The important thing is that you're making progress." As I settled into my bed that night, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. For the first time in months, I drifted off to sleep without fear of what nightmares or hallucinations might await me. But in the darkest hour of the night, I was jolted awake by a familiar crackling sound. My blood ran cold as I realized it was coming from the heart monitor beside my bed. "Did you think you could escape so easily, Ryan?" The dreaded voice emerged from the static. "Your reprieve was temporary. The final broadcast is approaching, and this time, there will be no waking up." I scrambled to hit the call button, my heart racing. As nurses rushed in, responding to my panic, the voice faded away, leaving me once again questioning what was real and what was delusion. As dawn broke, casting a pale light through my window, I sat huddled in my bed, the sheets pulled tight around me. The glimmer of hope I had felt the day before flickered, threatened by the darkness that still lurked in the corners of my mind. But as I watched the sun slowly rise, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, I made a decision. I wouldn't let this setback defeat me. I had tasted normalcy, felt the warmth of human connection again. Whether the voice was real or a product of my fractured psyche, I would fight it. With trembling hands, I reached for the notebook Dr. Patel had given me for journaling. On a fresh page, I wrote in large, determined letters, "The broadcast isn't over, but neither am I. This is my story, and I'm taking back control of the narrative." As I stared at the words, I felt a small spark of defiance ignite within me. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with doubts and setbacks. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt ready to face it head on. The final broadcast might be approaching, but I was determined to change the ending of this story. My story. The rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall seemed to grow louder with each passing second. I sat across from Dr. Patel in his office, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to hide their trembling. It had been a week since the night terror involving the heart monitor, and despite my initial determination, the fear had been slowly creeping back in. "Ryan," Dr. Patel began, his voice gentle but firm, "I understand you're hesitant about this, but I really think a temporary discharge could be beneficial for you. You've made significant progress, and exposing yourself to the outside world in controlled doses might help solidify that progress." I shook my head vehemently. "It's not safe out there. The radio, it's waiting for me. I can feel it." Dr. Patel leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. "Ryan, we've discussed this. The radio isn't real. It's a manifestation of your anxiety and fear. Staying here, hiding from the world, is only reinforcing those fears." I opened my mouth to argue, but the words died in my throat. Deep down, I knew he was right. The hospital had become a safety blanket, but it was also a prison of my own making. "What if—" I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if I have another episode out there? What if I hurt someone?" "That's a valid concern," Dr. Patel acknowledged, "but we've prepared for that possibility. You'll be staying with Sarah, who's been briefed on how to handle potential episodes. You'll have daily check-ins with me via phone, and you can return here immediately if things become overwhelming. This isn't about pushing you off a cliff, Ryan. It's about giving you the tools to build a bridge back to your life." I took a deep breath, trying to quell the panic rising in my chest. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll try." The next morning, I stood at the entrance of Oakwood, a small duffel bag containing my meager possessions at my feet. Sarah stood beside me, her car idling in the parking lot. The world beyond the hospital grounds seemed vast and terrifying. "Ready?" Sarah asked, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As we walked to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching my every move. The drive to Sarah's apartment was tense. Every stoplight, every turn felt like a potential trigger for disaster. I kept my eyes fixed on the dashboard, half expecting the car radio to spring to life with another dire prediction. "We're here," Sarah announced as we pulled into her apartment complex. Home sweet home, at least for the next week. As we entered her apartment, I was struck by how normal everything looked. The familiar scent of Sarah's favorite candles, the soft hum of the air conditioner, the sunlight streaming through the windows. It all felt surreal after weeks in the sterile hospital environment. "I set up the guest room for you," Sarah said, leading me down the hallway. "I thought having your own space might help you feel more comfortable." The guest room was small but cozy, with a comfortable-looking bed and a desk by the window. But what caught my eye was the small digital clock radio on the nightstand. "Sarah," I said, my voice tight with panic. "The radio. We need to get rid of it." Sarah's eyes widened in understanding. "Oh, Ryan, I'm so sorry. I didn't even think—" She quickly unplugged the radio and removed it from the room. "There, it's gone. Is there anything else that might be triggering?" I shook my head, feeling a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. "No, that's the main thing. Thank you." The rest of the day passed in a blur of nervous energy. Sarah did her best to keep me distracted, suggesting we watch movies or play board games. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that the other shoe was about to drop. As night fell, my anxiety reached a fever pitch. Every creak of the apartment, every distant siren from the street below set my nerves on edge. Maybe this was a mistake, I muttered, pacing the living room. "I should go back to Oakwood. It's not safe here." Sarah stood up from the couch, blocking my path. "Ryan, stop. You're working yourself up. Remember what Dr. Patel said about grounding techniques? Let's try one of those." She guided me to sit on the couch, then knelt in front of me, taking my hands in hers. "Okay, tell me 5 things you can see right now." I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to focus. The coffee table, your red throw pillow, the painting on the wall, the TV remote, your face. Good, Sarah encouraged. Now 4 things you can touch. We continued the exercise, and slowly, I felt my racing heart begin to calm. As the panic receded, exhaustion took its place. Why don't you try to get some sleep? Sarah suggested gently. I'll be right out here if you need anything. I nodded, too drained to argue. As I settled into the unfamiliar bed, I silently prayed for a dreamless night. But my prayers went unanswered. In the depths of sleep, I found myself standing in a vast, empty space. Darkness stretched in every direction, broken only by a single point of light in the distance. As I moved toward it, I realized it was coming from an old-fashioned radio, its dial glowing in eerie green. Welcome, Ryan. The familiar voice emanated from the radio. We've been waiting for you. I tried to turn, to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. This isn't real, I said, my voice echoing in the void. You're not real. This is just a dream. The radio chuckled, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. Oh, Ryan, haven't you realized by now? The line between reality and dreams is far more blurred than you think. But don't worry, it will all become clear soon. Your final broadcast is approaching. Suddenly, the darkness around me began to shift and change. I found myself standing on a busy street corner, people rushing past me in a blur. In the distance, I could see a familiar building, my old office. Pay attention now, the radio's voice whispered in my ear. This is important. I watched in horror as I saw myself, or rather, a version of myself, exit the office building. Dream Ryan checked his watch, then stepped off the curb to cross the street. No! I tried to shout, but no sound came out. I knew what was coming, could feel it in my bones. A screeching of tires, a blare of a horn, and then impact. I watched, helpless, as my doppelganger was thrown through the air, landing in a crumpled heap on the pavement. This is your future, Ryan, the radio's voice said, now coming from everywhere at once. Tomorrow, 5:17 p.m., the corner of 4th and Main. This is how your story ends. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. Sarah burst into the room, her eyes wide with concern. Ryan, what happened? Are you okay? I shook my head, trying to catch my breath. We have to go now. We have to get out of the city. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, placing a calming hand on my arm. Slow down, Ryan. It was just a nightmare. You're safe here. No, you don't understand, I insisted, throwing off the covers and stumbling to my feet. It wasn't just a nightmare. It was a warning. Tomorrow, 5:17 p.m., corner of 4th and Main. I'm going to die if we don't leave now. Sarah's face fell, a mix of sadness and resignation in her eyes. Oh, Ryan, I thought we were past this. It wasn't real. Your mind is playing tricks on you again. No, I shouted, frustration and fear making my voice crack. Why won't anyone believe me? I'm not crazy. This is real and we need to go. I began throwing clothes into my duffel bag, my movements frantic and uncoordinated. Sarah watched helplessly, torn between trying to calm me and calling for help. As I zipped up the bag, a thought struck me. Fine. If you won't come with me, I'll go alone. I'm not going to sit around and wait for death. Sarah stepped between me and the door. Ryan, please think about this. You're having an episode. Let me call Dr. Patel. We can work through this together. For a moment, I hesitated. The rational part of my brain, the part that had been slowly healing over the past weeks, tried to assert itself. But then I remembered the vivid details of the dream, the certainty I felt about the impending doom. I'm sorry, Sarah, I said, my voice low and determined. I can't take that chance. Before she could react, I pushed past her and ran out of the apartment. I could hear her calling after me, but I didn't look back. My heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I burst out onto the street. As I flagged down a taxi, giving the driver instructions to take me to the bus station, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled along by an invisible thread of fate. Was I racing toward salvation? or hurtling headlong into the very doom I was trying to escape? The city lights blurred past the taxi window, and in their reflection, I swore I could see the faint outline of a radio dial, counting down the seconds to my final broadcast. The bus station was a hive of activity, even in the early hours of the morning. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow over the tired faces of travelers. I stood in line at the ticket counter, my heart racing, constantly glancing over my shoulder. Every announcement over the PA system made me flinch, half expecting to hear that dreaded voice predicting my doom. "Next," the bored-looking ticket agent called. I stepped forward, my hands shaking as I placed them on the counter. "I need a ticket for the next bus out of the city. I don't care where it's going." The agent raised an eyebrow. "Anywhere specific you're trying to avoid?" "Just away," I muttered, pushing a crumpled handful of bills across the counter. She shrugged, tapping at her computer. "There's a bus leaving for Chicago in 20 minutes. That work for you?" I nodded, relief washing over me. Chicago was far, far away from 4th and Main. As I took my ticket and moved towards the waiting area, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. With a pang of guilt, I silenced the call. As I settled into an uncomfortable plastic chair, my eyes were drawn to a small TV mounted in the corner of the waiting area. The morning news was playing, the anchor's voice barely audible over the din of the station. Suddenly, the image on the screen changed. The anchor was replaced by a familiar face, my own. I blinked, sure I was hallucinating again. But as I focused, I realized it was real. My picture was on the news, accompanied by a headline, "Missing Man, Local Authorities Seek Public's Help." I stood up abruptly, moving closer to the TV. The volume seemed to increase on its own, the anchor's voice cutting through the background noise. Ryan Mitchell, a 32-year-old man with a history of mental health issues, was last seen leaving his friend's apartment in a state of distress. Authorities are concerned for his safety and are asking anyone with information to come forward. Mitchell is described as... My breath caught in my throat. They were looking for me. Sarah must have called the police after I ran out. I glanced around nervously, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. "Hey, you okay, man?" A gruff voice startled me out of my panic. I turned to see an older man in a worn trucker's cap looking at me with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." For a moment, I considered confiding in this stranger, spilling out my whole bizarre story, but the words caught in my throat. "I'm fine," I muttered. "Just nervous about traveling." The man nodded sympathetically. "First time on a long bus ride? Don't worry, it's not so bad. Just bring something to keep yourself occupied." As he walked away, his words echoed in my mind. Something to keep myself occupied. An idea began to form, crazy and desperate, but somehow feeling right. I rushed to the small convenience store in the station, purchasing a notebook and a cheap tape recorder. With shaking hands, I found a quiet corner and began to write, speaking softly into the recorder as I did. "My name is Ryan Mitchell, and this is my story. I don't know if anyone will ever hear this, but I need to get it out. It all started with a radio." For the next hour, I poured out everything, finding the radio, the predictions, my descent into paranoia, the hospital, and my desperate flight from the city. As I spoke and wrote, something shifted inside me. The act of putting my experiences into words, of creating a tangible record, felt empowering. "Final boarding call for bus 237 to Chicago," a voice announced over the PA system. I gathered my things, tucking the notebook and recorder safely into my bag. As I boarded the bus, I felt a strange mix of fear and determination. I had no idea what awaited me in Chicago, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was taking control of my own narrative. The bus pulled out of the station just as the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. I leaned my head against the cool window, watching the city recede into the distance. Hours passed, the landscape outside changing from urban sprawl to rolling countryside. I drifted in and out of a fitful sleep, jolting awake at every bump in the road or sudden noise. As we approached the outskirts of Chicago, I felt my anxiety begin to spike again. What if I hadn't gone far enough? What if the prediction followed me here? The bus pulled into the Chicago station around 3 p.m. As passengers began to disembark, I remained frozen in my seat, paralyzed by indecision. Where would I go? What would I do now? End of the line, buddy. The bus driver called out to me. You gotta get off now. Numbly, I gathered my things and stepped off the bus. The Chicago station was even busier than the one I'd left, the cacophony of voices and announcements overwhelming my senses. I stumbled to a nearby bench, sinking down onto it as the reality of my situation crashed over me. I was alone in a strange city, with no plan, no place to stay, and the clock ticking down to 5:17 p.m., the time of my predicted death. As I sat there, lost in my spiraling thoughts, a small transistor radio caught my eye. It was sitting on the bench next to me, seemingly abandoned. My heart began to race as I stared at it, memories of all the broadcasts flooding back. With trembling hands, I reached for the radio. As my fingers touched its surface, it crackled to life. This is a special bulletin, the familiar voice announced. Ryan Mitchell, reported missing earlier today, has been located in Chicago. Authorities are en route to escort him to a local hospital for evaluation. In a surprising twist, Mitchell claims to have recordings and written accounts detailing his experiences with a prophetic radio. Experts are divided on whether this is evidence of an elaborate delusion or... The voice faded into static, leaving me stunned. How could they know about the recordings I'd made on the bus? I hadn't told anyone, hadn't shared them with a soul. A chilling realization washed over me. What if I had been shaping this narrative all along? What if my attempts to document my experiences were actually creating them? With shaking hands, I pulled out the notebook and recorder. I stared at them, these innocuous objects that suddenly held so much power and menace. A commotion at the station entrance caught my attention. 2 police officers and a man in a white coat were scanning the crowd, clearly searching for someone. Time seemed to slow down as I made my decision. I stood up, clutching the notebook and recorder tightly. Instead of running, instead of trying to escape, I walked directly towards the search party. I'm Ryan Mitchell, I said as I approached them, my voice steadier than I expected. I think I need help. The man in the white coat stepped forward, his expression a mix of concern and relief. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Dr. Reeves. We've been very worried about you. Can you tell me what's going on? I took a deep breath, feeling as though I was standing on the edge of a precipice. It's a long story, Doctor, but I think I might finally be ready to tell it. All of it. As they led me out of the station, I glanced at my watch. 5:16 p.m. In 1 minute, I was supposed to die at the corner of 4th and Main, hundreds of miles away. But here I was, alive and, if not well, at least facing my demons head-on. The police car pulled away from the curb at exactly 5:17 p.m. As we drove through the unfamiliar streets of Chicago, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The final broadcast hadn't come, or maybe it had, but not in the way I expected. I looked down at the notebook in my lap, at the recorder clutched in my hand. These were my tools now, not instruments of torment, but means of understanding, of taking control of my own story. As the city lights began to flicker on in the gathering dusk, I allowed myself a small smile. The journey ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and setbacks. But for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of true hope. The radio's reign of terror was over. It was time for me to write my own future, one word at a time. The stark white walls of the Chicago Behavioral Health Center seemed to close in around me as I sat in Dr. Reeves's office. It had been 3 days since my arrival in the city, 3 days of intense therapy sessions, medication adjustments, and soul-searching. Dr. Reeves leaned forward in his chair, his kind eyes fixed on me. Ryan, I've reviewed your case files from Oakwood, as well as the recordings and writings you made during your journey. I have to say, it's one of the most fascinating cases I've encountered in my career. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. Fascinating isn't exactly how I'd describe it, Dr. Reeves. He nodded sympathetically. Of course, I apologize. I can only imagine how terrifying this experience has been for you, but I believe we've made a breakthrough in understanding what's been happening. My heart rate quickened. You mean, you believe me about the radio? Dr. Reeves paused, choosing his words carefully. I believe that your experiences were very real to you, Ryan. But I think we need to explore the possibility that the radio was a manifestation of something deeper. I felt a familiar surge of frustration. You think I'm crazy, just like everyone else? Not at all, Dr. Reeves said firmly. Your mind created an incredibly complex narrative as a way of processing trauma and anxiety. That's not crazy, Ryan. It's actually a testament to your mind's resilience and creativity. I sat back, trying to process his words. So, what now? How do we fix this? Dr. Reeves smiled. We don't fix you, Ryan. You're not broken. We work together to understand these experiences, to integrate them into your life story in a way that's healing rather than harmful. As we continued to talk, I felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time, someone was offering an explanation that made sense, that didn't dismiss my experiences outright. Our session was interrupted by a knock on the door. A nurse poked her head in. I'm sorry to interrupt, Dr. Reeves, but there's an urgent call for Ryan. A Sarah Thompson? My stomach dropped. In the chaos of the past few days, I had almost forgotten about Sarah. The guilt of leaving her behind, of ignoring her calls, came crashing back. Dr. Reeves looked at me questioningly. I nodded, and he gestured for the nurse to transfer the call to his office phone. With trembling hands, I picked up the receiver. Sarah? Ryan? Oh my God, are you okay? I've been worried sick. Sarah's voice was a mix of relief and anger. I'm okay, I said, my voice cracking. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I shouldn't have run off like that. I was scared and confused and... Save it, Sarah cut me off. We can talk about that later. Right now, there's something you need to know. It's about the radio. My blood ran cold. What about it? Sarah took a deep breath. After you left, I went back to your apartment to look for clues about where you might have gone. I found something strange. There was an old shoebox in the back of your closet. Inside was a bunch of old letters and a journal. Your grandfather's journal. I frowned, confused. My grandfather? What does he have to do with this? Ryan, the journal. It talks about a radio that could predict the future. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. That's impossible. My grandfather died before I was born. I never even met him. I know, but listen to this. I heard the rustling of pages as Sarah began to read. June 15th, 1962. The radio spoke again today. It told me things, terrible things, about wars to come, about disasters that will shake the world. I tried to warn them, but they won't listen. They think I'm losing my mind. Maybe I am. But the radio, it's never wrong. My mind was reeling. Sarah, this can't be real. It has to be a coincidence. There's more, Ryan. Your grandfather, he died in a car accident. The journal entry from the day before. It predicted it in detail. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Dr. Reeves was looking at me with concern, obviously noting my distress. Ryan? Sarah's voice brought me back to the present. There's one more thing. The last entry. It's about you. What? I whispered. It says, to my grandson, who will inherit this burden, the radio will find you when the time is right. Trust in it, but do not let it consume you. Your fate is your own to shape. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering to the desk. Dr. Reeves was at my side in an instant, his voice sounding distant as he asked if I was all right. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Everything I had experienced, everything I had been told was a delusion. Could it actually be real? Ryan, Dr. Reeves's voice cut through the chaos in my head. What's going on? What did Sarah tell you? I looked up at him, my vision blurry with unshed tears. I need to go back. I need to see that journal for myself. Dr. Reeves frowned. Ryan, I'm not sure that's a good idea. You've made so much progress here. Engaging with these delusions again could be a significant setback. They're not delusions, I shouted, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. I'm sorry, Dr. Reeves, but you don't understand. This is real. It's always been real. I stood up, my legs shaky but my resolve firm. I'm checking myself out. I need to go home. Dr. Reeves looked conflicted. Ryan, please, let's talk about this. We can explore these new developments together in a safe environment. But I was already moving towards the door. I'm sorry, Dr. Reeves. Thank you for your help, but this is something I need to do on my own. The next few hours passed in a blur, checking out of the hospital against medical advice, booking a flight back home, the anxiety-filled journey through the airport. All the while, my grandfather's words echoed in my mind. Your fate is your own to shape. As the plane took off, I clutched my notebook tightly. I had been using it to document my therapy sessions, my thoughts and feelings as I worked through my supposed delusions. Now, it felt like a lifeline to a truth I was only beginning to understand. I opened to a fresh page and began to write. My name is Ryan Mitchell, and this is the true story of the radio that speaks to my family. I don't know why we were chosen for this burden, or what it means for my future, but I do know this. I'm done running. I'm done hiding. It's time to face whatever comes next, head on. As the city lights of Chicago faded into the distance below, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. Whatever awaited me back home, be it answers, more questions, or dangers I couldn't yet imagine, I was ready to face it. The final broadcast was coming, but this time, I would be the one controlling the narrative. As the plane soared through the night sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, on some frequency beyond human perception, a radio was tuning itself to my future. And for the first time since this all began, I wasn't afraid to listen. The taxi pulled up to my apartment building, the familiar facade looming before me in the pale light of dawn. I paid the driver and stepped out, my duffel bag feeling heavier than ever. The city was just beginning to stir, the quiet streets a stark contrast to the tumult in my mind. As I approached the building's entrance, I saw a figure huddled on the steps. Sarah. She looked up as I neared, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. Ryan, she breathed, standing up shakily. You're really here? I nodded, unsure of what to say. How do you apologize for running away, for doubting the one person who stood by you through everything? Sarah solved the dilemma by pulling me into a fierce hug. Don't you ever do that to me again, she mumbled into my shoulder. I'm sorry, I whispered, the words feeling woefully inadequate. For everything. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. We can talk about that later. Right now we need to focus on what I found. The gravity of why I'd returned hit me anew. The journal. My grandfather's journal. Sarah nodded, fishing a key out of her pocket. I left it in your apartment. Didn't feel right to take it. As we entered my apartment, the familiar surroundings felt alien, as if I was seeing them through new eyes. Had it really only been a few weeks since I'd last been here? It felt like a lifetime. Sarah led me to the living room, where an old shoebox sat on the coffee table. My heart raced as I approached it, feeling like I was about to open Pandora's box. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among yellowed letters and faded photographs, was a leather-bound journal. I picked it up, the weight of it feeling significant in more ways than one. Have you read all of it? I asked Sarah, my voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head. Just bits and pieces. It felt private. But Ryan, what I did read, it's incredible and terrifying. I sank onto the couch, opening the journal to the first page. My grandfather's neat handwriting filled the page, dated June 1st, 1960. Today, I found the radio. Or perhaps it found me. I know how this will sound, but I swear it's true. This radio, it speaks of things yet to come. God help me, I think it's showing me the future. For the next hour, I read entry after entry, my grandfather's descent into obsession mirroring my own recent experiences with chilling accuracy. Sarah sat beside me, silent but supportive, as I delved deeper into this family legacy I never knew I had. Then I reached the entry Sarah had mentioned on the phone, the one predicting my grandfather's death. My hands shook as I read his words, penned just a day before he died. The radio spoke again last night. This time it was about me. A car accident, it said. Tomorrow, at the intersection of Maple and 5th. I've tried to convince myself it's wrong, that I can avoid it. But deep down, I know. This is my time. To my dear Helen, to my children, and to the grandson I'll never meet but who I know will inherit this burden. I'm sorry, and I hope you can forgive me for what I'm about to do. I looked up at Sarah, my vision blurry with tears. He knew, and he still... Sarah squeezed my hand. Keep reading, Ryan. There's more. I turned the page, surprised to find one last entry. The handwriting was shaky, as if written in a great hurry. To my grandson, Ryan. If you're reading this, then the radio has found you just as it found me. I'm writing this moments before I leave for what I know will be my final drive. I want you to understand, the radio is real. Its predictions are real, but they are not absolute. I leaned forward, hanging on every word. The radio shows us possibilities, branching paths of fate. But we have the power to choose which path we take. I've spent years letting the radio's predictions control me, shape my every decision. Don't make the same mistake. Use its knowledge wisely, but never let it consume you. Your fate is your own to shape. The final line sent a chill down my spine. One last warning, Ryan. The radio's final broadcast is the most dangerous. It will try to fulfill its own prophecy. Whatever you do, don't let it. The entry ended abruptly, as if my grandfather had been interrupted mid-sentence. I stared at the unfinished warning, my mind reeling. Ryan? Sarah's voice broke through my thoughts. What does it mean? The final broadcast? I shook my head, standing up and beginning to pace. I don't know, but I think I've been hearing it all along. All those predictions of my death, they were building to something. But what? As if in answer to my question, a familiar crackling filled the air. Sarah and I both froze, our eyes drawn to the old radio sitting on a shelf across the room. I had completely forgotten about it, the innocuous antique that had started this whole nightmare. The radio sprung to life, that dreaded voice emerging from the static. This is the final broadcast. Ryan Mitchell, your time has come. In your attempt to destroy that which you fear, you will bring about the very fate you've been trying to avoid. The cycle ends where it began. The voice faded, replaced by an ominous ticking, like a countdown. Sarah grabbed my arm. Ryan, we need to get out of here now. But I stood rooted to the spot, my grandfather's words echoing in my mind. No, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. No more running. It's time to end this. I approached the radio, my heart pounding in my chest. The ticking grew louder with each step. Ryan, don't, Sarah pleaded. What if it's a trap? I turned to her, a sad smile on my face. That's just it, Sarah. It's always been a trap, making me run, making me hide, making me doubt myself and everyone around me. But not anymore. I reached for the radio, my hand hovering over it. The ticking reached a fever pitch. I am Ryan Mitchell, I declared, my voice growing stronger, and I choose my own fate. With that, I grabbed the radio, fully expecting Something. An explosion, a bolt of lightning, some cataclysmic event to fulfill the prophecy. Instead, there was only silence. I blinked, looking down at the radio in my hands. It was just that. A radio. Old, a bit dusty, but utterly ordinary. "I don't understand," Sarah said, approaching cautiously. "Was that it? Is it over?" I turned the radio over in my hands, a humorless laugh escaping me. Maybe that was the point all along. The final broadcast, the ultimate prediction. It was that I would face my fear, that I would stop running and confront it head on. As the realization sank in, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The radio hadn't been predicting my death all along. It had been challenging me to live, to take control of my own story. I set the radio down gently, then turned to Sarah. I think it's really over." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "So what now?" I took a deep breath, looking around the apartment that had felt like a prison for so long. Now we start writing a new chapter. One where I'm not controlled by fear or prophecies. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting a warm glow through the windows, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. The radio sat silent on the shelf, no longer a harbinger of doom, but a reminder of the power of choice. I picked up my grandfather's journal, running my fingers over the worn leather cover. "I think I have a story to tell," I said softly. "About a family legacy, about facing your fears, about choosing your own path." Sarah squeezed my hand. "I can't wait to read it." As we left the apartment, stepping out into the bright morning, I cast one last glance at the radio. It remained silent, its job done. The final broadcast had come and gone, not with a bang, but with the quiet realization that the power had been within me all along. The future stretched out before me, uncertain but full of possibility. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where the story would lead.